what do I want?
Is everyone ready for the 1AC?
All right, I'm good to go.
I haven't downloaded it yet. 1 second. I'm ready.
Okay. This is the culture war. Trans youth are being increasingly victimized by the politics of visibility and preyed upon by mainstream media. Threat projection is once again being used to marginalize an entire group of people. Nearly 100 anti-trans bills have been introduced in state legislatures in just the last 4 months. GERA 21. For the first time, the Equality Act will get a hearing in the Senate. The hearing will provide an opportunity for opponents to deliver a torrent of anti-LGBT content to feed the right-wing media outbursts, all of which will be repeated by media outlets across the political spectrum. Keeping that debate going is largely the Republican strategy. They are merely recasting its sides. Moral panic about children being transgender is more reliable. That will be Republicans' core message, and it will sound like vaguely recalled, cruelly phrased claims about genitals, hormones, and chromosomes. This is the agenda: to use discrimination to maintain a social order in which only people who seem straight and cisgender have the right to exist in public and survive. In schools, in front of landlords, in healthcare settings, we are fighting over power. The rhetoric of purported harm is a kind of evolution with the same core. We know what's best for you, which is the same thing as saying we will control you. They are not wrong. Lives are on the line. The struggle here is about what the right knows it is actually losing: the power to control people's lives through institutionalized bias, stigma, and violence. When the stakes are so clearly stated, it's obvious why it won't be given up without a fight. Even if the bills don't become law, the rhetoric they introduce into mainstream culture and the possibilities of legalized discrimination means that the stakes are high. This series of attacks is not unprecedented, but rather a continuation of anti-visibility backlash. Bauer 20. Many pieces of legislation will never become law, but the ones that do could have serious implications beyond the LGBTQ plus community. It's the same basic playbook: a culture war narrative paired with a try anything once legislative approach. If and when it works, will have devastating consequences for all basic rights. Many of the bills define sex as the biological state of being female or male. They criminalize prescribing puberty blocking medication. Whatever specific shape these anti-trans bills take, there's a coalition of organizations that will show up to support them. The culture war being spun by these anti-transgender organizations also gets a boost from the conservative media ecosystem, which then feeds into the legislative process. The whole country is talking about it. It went from an issue very few people talked about to being covered highly by the media. This legislative session is seeing one of the most aggressive and serious set of attacks from legislators on trans people in 5 years. Part 2, the plan. The nature of transgender oppression will not be changed by the politics of visibility. Rather, entrenched structures such as misogyny, transphobia, capitalism, the carceral state, and others all replicate this violence, which creates the opportunity for things like anti-transgender bills to take place. Fisher, 19. This transgender tipping point has resulted in a conservative backlash with increased surveillance and regulation of trans people by the security state and media organizations. This backlash can be seen in the surge of bathroom laws that criminalize trans people's use of public restrooms based on their gender. The popularity of transgender issues in the current moment is contingent cultural and national belonging, given the gendered and racialized violence that the state continues to enact. Dominant representations of deceptive, deviant, and threatened continue to permeate mass-mediated discourse and are used to justify and frequently normalize state-sanctioned violence against gender nonconforming populations. Part 3, the aftermath. The politics of visibility has made it into the debate space. People with marginalized identities reading innovative arguments are simply existing as competitively successful in this space encounter backlash from the community. It all follows the pattern of hypervisibility leading to backlash and a regression to the status quo. Literally, what has changed in this activity in the past 20 years? Nothing. Literally nothing. People have started websites, whole-ass organizations, lobbied the NSDA, lobbied the TOC, nothing changes. Raising awareness doesn't work, and it probably does more harm than good. Look at the many ways that transgender competitors are forced to be hypervisible. Disclosure forced them to put their personal narratives and identity arguments out to the internet where anyone can find them. Otherwise, at some tournaments, they will be disqualified, or others they lose on theory. If they want their pronouns respected, because practically no one uses gender-neutral language, they have to blast their pronouns out to everyone or put it on their disclosure page. If you don't want your safety or dignity violated as a trans person, you have to out yourself and be visible. It's even worse with virtual debate, as it has revolutionized access to rounds, led to them being recorded and published for all to see, forcing debaters to sign releases in order to compete. In some cases, debaters are not allowed to tell observers to leave their rounds even if they're uncomfortable. To all of this, add social media, primarily Discord. With rapid communication, you have an echo chamber ready to explode and make the lives of people like me a living hell. This is a manifestation of visibility politics in the debate space. Here's some personal experience. This is the last time I will compete in debate. The last 2 years has been a living hell. Here's the year in wrap. I filed 7 equity campaigns, was misgendered nearly 200 times, was refused accommodations twice, and dropped out of 2 tournaments. I don't get round robin invites, and I'm definitely not viewed as a good debater. And to be honest, I don't care. The power structures of LD debate have been and will continue to resist change. This means debate drills, big schools like Straight Jesuit, debate camps keep pushing format and culture inside a debate that is toxic and harmful for many debaters. Thus, the role of the ballot and role of the judges to vote for the debater that constructs the best liberation strategy for oppressed bodies. For people like me, inclusion and accessibility are prior questions. A, if I'm not included in the space, then I can't reap the benefits the rules create. B, if trans people keep fleeing the activity just like other marginalized identities, then it'll eventually have to be reformed. We might as well do it now. C, it's the judge's role as an educator to ensure safety and inclusion, not just in this round, but in this space. D, debaters should not have to justify their right to exist. If I win the status quo is causing people like me to leave, if that's conceded, then voting for the status quo is an endorsement of that. Or 4, the resistance. Nobody misses both the political and revolutionary strategy to challenge and work within the state. It uses the benefits of hypervisibility to bring spaces down, just like the debate community. Fisher, 19. While somebody's an individual who is not only recognized but given value by the market, the state, and mainstream society, and nobody's neglected, ignored, or actively exploited for value and targeted for disposal by the same entities. Nobody this is therefore strategic use of one's marginalization to subvert the logic and institutions of heteronormative and white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. Thus, nobodiness does not equate to invisibility, but rather is a tactical navigation and subversion of the constraints of visibility in the dominant institutions that exploit those constraints for profit and power. Nobodies are the ones that do the work of caring for and organizing their communities or neighborhoods. Nobodies are range. Nobodies are the ones that are working and driving grassroots organizations such as the Sylvia Rivera Law Project or Trans Women of Color Collective, who tirelessly work for liberation outside of the LGBTQ plus mainstream.
Ready?
Yeah, I'm all set.
Okay. If I clip cards during the 1NC, should I lose?
If you clip cards during the 1NC, should you lose? I don't think if it's a question of ethics, I think it's against the rules. And I think then, yeah, should lose.
So breaking the rules means that one should lose? Is that the conclusion?
What did you say? You cut out for a second.
I said, oh, so does breaking the rules mean that one should lose?
Well, that's not. So I think it's important to draw a distinction between norms and rules. It is tournament policy that you cannot clip cards. It is not tournament policy.
It's also tournament policy to defend the January-February resolution, is it not?
Is
Like
it?
when you sign like the honor code, it says like I will be fair and defend the policy.
Does it? You
But
should
that's
send me
not the
that.
point. Anyway, let's talk
That's
about the
very
affirmative.
cool.
What does voting have to do?
What does voting affirmative do? It's an endorsement of
Yes.
nobodiness and a method to subvert the debate space through tactical subversion and, I guess, use of hypervisibility. So, for example, I think
What is
debate is probably not the best space, especially for people like me. And using nobodiness and hypervisibility is me asking for the ballot while not debating normally to
Can you
subvert
explain what
and
hypervisibility and nobodiness is?
yeah, so for example, hypervisibility is trans kids being forced to testify in state legislators how they are human beings. Like, for example, in like Arkansas, when they were trying to pass that bill, that's trans people being hypervisible, visible all the time, which is the only way to engage in like mainstream politics. Nobodiness is acknowledging that that hypervisibility is not going to lead to anywhere. Like raising awareness is bullshit. Instead, we should
Okay,
create
so
communities of
first
care.
question that goes along with that: if um, people stop trying to engage in politics, why does that not let the far right just sort of fill in and make even more anti sort of
Yeah, I
racist,
mean, of
sexist
course you
policy?
can make a C the political argument, but I think it's like sort of a shit argument compared to like the 1AC because our argument is that the right already controls the media. So even like and are always in by proxy are always in control of politics. You're also going to have to win that politics are like a good thing for people like me. Like I don't think it's helpful to make like trans kids testify in state legislators about like why I'm like human. And that's a form of politics, and I think it's pretty bullshit and doesn't really work, obviously, because they still pass it.
Wait, why is it my burden to do that?
To do what?
To,
Well,
to win that,
I'm just
like
talking. If you make a C the political argument, you have to defend political as a good thing.
so I guess this method that you've isolated, how does it fix the examples provided in part three?
Yeah, sure. Nobodiness subverts the hypervisibility of the debate space and exposes its contradictions. So, for example, me explaining why debate is so messed up in so many ways and then asking for the ballot and tactically subverting it because like I know how to debate and I can like I know how to win a ballot. But I also at the same time while demanding the ballot, I can be like debate sucks, which is how you like tactically use it to like subvert problematic systems.
Cool, I'll take it. Start. Why'd you break a new F?
Why did I break a new F?
Yeah.
There are quite a few reasons. I wasn't really vibing with the other app that I was reading, so like consequently, when you don't like the old app, you have to break a new one. Um, yeah, that's sort of what breaking a new app means. Yeah, so I would say that's why I did that.
Yeah, use 240. Send it one off case.
One off in case.
Get sent. Is everybody cool with me spreading, or would anybody like me to go slower?
It says in my wiki not to spread.
Okay, cool. My apologies. Let me know when everybody has the doc.
I'm good to go.
Yeah, so the order will be the doc down, then just part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. Does that make sense? Cool. First off, intervention violation. The affirmative must defend a hypothetical implementation of a policy in which states ban lethal autonomous weapons. They don't read their advocacy. Resolve means a policy. Words and phrases. 64. Resolve is determination by legislature to establish by law. States or governments. MCDRs. 33. The state should possess a permanent population, defined territory, government, and capacity to enter relations with other states. Laws are weapons that can independently select and attack targets. That's Nestlage. 15. Autonomous weapons defined as weapons that can independently select and attack targets with autonomy and critical functions of acquiring, tracking, selecting, and attacking targets. The ICRC included 21 states, 13 experts. The DoD defined autonomous weapons as a weapon system that can select and engage targets without further intervention by human operator. The DoD distinguishes semi-autonomous weapon systems and human-supervised autonomous weapon system. The distinction is the selection. Vote negative for predictable limits and ground. Allowing the app to pick any grounds for the debate makes negative engagement impossible. 3 impacts. 1. Accessibility and clash. Changing the topic post facto structurally favors the app by making neg prep which is based on the resolution, useless. The judge can only make meaningful decision when both sides have equal opportunity. Only our model ensures effective class through rigorous testing. 2. Competitive equity. Debate is a competitive game which loses meaning without substantive constraints. Everybody comes to debate for different reasons, but the fact that the other team is here and has presented the 1AC means they have bought into the game, and B, concedes the authority of fairness, so the judges should hack against you. 3. Skills. Effective deliberation over laws is necessary to foster portable skills and improve attitudes. Otherwise, we fail prey to dogma and groupthink. The TVA, read a whole res app that bans laws because they are good for the state, which would then destroy the state. 2nd, read a whole res app, but read the AI disad as your affirmative. It means that it would subvert things like the economy and destroy things like the political and prevent things like AI domination of weapons, which should solve back for the political being important. Takes away things like American hegemony. 3rd, read an econ disad Aussie affirmative. Read that banning laws would destroy the economy because it would take a lot of money to do so because of the process of doing so, which means that it would destroy the state and make it collapse upon itself. Solves all your politics arguments and is affirmative that can still defend politics while also destroying politics at the same time. Any solvency deficits are neg ground. The form content distinction encompasses your often switch side is good. It forces debater to consider controversial issues from multiple perspectives. Non-TAPs allow individuals to establish their own metrics for what they want to debate, leading to ideological dogmatism, while switch side encompasses your education more radically. At best, they are extra T, which is devoted for limits, or effects T, which is worse, since only small outcomes build to the resolution. Fairness comes first. Debate is a game. Force winner, loser, competitive norms in a tournament, and by alternative impacts like activism or education can be pursued in other forms. That makes fairness the most important impact. 1. It's a medical shade. To evaluate any of the arguments why fairness doesn't matter, it has to be evaluated fairly, which means it's psychoshade on debate. B. It's intrinsic. The only reason why anybody is here in the debates is because of fairness. The only reason why it exists is because fairness exists, meaning it's sort of part of the debate. If they try to impact turn the game itself, they should lose because they engaged in it in the first place. 3rd is that you should hack against them because it means they don't care and you should just vote neg after the 2A or not listen to it. D. It link turns the 1AC. Things like structural fairness exclude body from the debate, so which internal link turns their accessibility argument. E. It's the only impact that can be actually solved in a debate. Fairness, the only thing that can maximize their impacts are very obscure. Debate is good. Archer. 18. Political justice lawyers must be able to break a systematic problem into manageable components. The complexity of social problems can cause students to become overwhelmed. The excessive force by officers and against people of color. Law students outraged. What can be done? Advocates must break apart the force more manageable than acting as there is a single lever. Advocates must also strategize the fight for justice as a marathon. Small victories can be building blocks for systematic reform. Advocates can find it difficult to identify correct solutions. Students are not often forced to struggle through the resolution. Large-scale fact investigation, transferring knowledge to different contexts. Political justice lawyers offer powerful strategies to advance the cause of justice through integrated advocacy. The job of education. T-framework has to be dropped. The debater indicts their method of engagement. Proves we couldn't engage fairly with the app. Cross-apply truth emphasizing competing interests. Reasonability is arbitrary. You can't be reasonably topical and cause a race to the bottom of questionable argumentation, nor are their logical. It encourages baiting, which is more unfair. Use competing interests. Reasonability leads to a race to the bottom and allows judgment to mention ballot paradox. Placing the decision on the potential of the ballot as violence. There's no change ballot around makes the judge violent arbitrary subjectivity. 4 or 3 no impact turns. Exclusions are inevitable because we only have 45 minutes of debate. Best to draw the conclusion along reciprocal lines to ensure rule for the negative. The case we can do turn our arguments. Anything else is unpredictable. Allows them to shift out of our offense. The role of the ballot is to determine whether the app is a good idea. Anything else is arbitrary. Self-serving begs the question of rest of the debate. You should vote negative on presumption. The affirmative IC does not solve the harms they've isolated for 3 reasons. A system. The one IC argues that material institutions like the ADA create the social realities that replicate the violence, but seeing the state refuses to alter these conditions. B spill over. The app assumes that advocacy results in helping people, but they're missing the robust internal link to solving oppression in or outside the round. Impact turning any attempt to use the ballot to make debate more accessible. 1, it leaves 0 rule for the negative, or only ground to say that debate should not be more accessible, or to say that nothing at all, which is a terrible choice that forces us to be non-responsive to their offense. Also, they broke a new affirmative, which proves that they're engaging in some form of competition. Just because they didn't just break a new affirmative because they were bored of their old affirmative, they also had, there was obviously some competitive nature to it, which means that they buy into it as well. Now, skip the next 2 arguments. Competition is good. That's January 18. Tactical change takes repeated encounters to human collective agency, adoptive conflicts within overall ideological consistency. Reporting theorizing pays little attention to what works. Tradition of intelligence, long general strike of denial services, attacks the community's moral incompetence. Tactical forms confront the capital with the bonds of social relations. Strategy denotes longer term goals, while tactics are means to advance. Best analyze game of the protocol coalitions go and counter moves. Cut the card. Counter moves. The ballot just said if you think their model is good, don't give them the ballot. 1 is the co-option. Just said incorporates the app into debate win-loss structure, where debates levy arguments beat each other, causes the challenge to post traditional debate gets co-opted. Empirically proven by LARPers who stopped reading the K to gain a comparative, or started reading the K to gain a comparative advantage. Skip the allies. Just had no evidence or powers of the ballot. That's Ritter 13. The comprehensive interest collapse the debate make it very different until an empirical study is conducted. Judges should not take it for granted. While it's possible, debate has created social change. The problem is that nothing supports from debate rounds can create social change other than anything else possible. Voting them for the form of judge consumption we make ourselves feel better than well structures, but complicit in which sustains them and turns the case. That's ton of public controversy through a therapy enables political action. Their therapeutic impulse to emphasize itself as a solution ignores the structural impediments and performance of self left little for the room productive. Our argument of confessional art may act individual salvation at the expense of a group. The case, the top. The Gira evidence. 1, the shell link turns this argument. The only way to determine whether things are bad is through things like competition, which internal link turns the argument. 2nd, our Archer evidence is super good here. It teaches skills that recall those things like transphobic policies in the system of politics. 3, bills don't become laws means that debating about them can fix it and proves that competition and things like that are good. The Barr evidence. 1, the culture of them being rejected flips the other way because it puts people against the state and forces things like revolutionary movements to take place. The Pictures 2 19 evidence. Policy debate solve having limits allow us to talk about these things in the first place, which is the only way to actually gain it. Otherwise, people will constantly just call you unfair. But our TVAs say that you can do things like break down the state and talk about things like trans violence, but also just be topical, which solves back to part 3, the aftermath stuff. Things like awareness have helped people, things like Instagram posts and etc. solve back and mean that things are changing in the debate space. Having a pessimistic view of things is bad. It subverts things and makes people believe that no change is going to happen writ large, which is an impact turn to their model because it means that there's no possibility of change by just saying that nothing can get better and we should just hide. To reading of individual arguments is not a bad thing. It just means that people are trying to win, which is part of our internal links about how competition is probably a good thing. The analytics stuff, no, things have changed like Instagram posts, what I said above. 2nd, it's a double turn, acting in forms of pessimism, or this is just the argument above my bad, the disclosure stuff. No, this is answered by why competition is good. People, even if you win your sort of advocacy, that's not going to stop people from asking for disclosure. It has nothing to do with the personal experience. We're impact turning the notion of purple sphinx, which we made above, making us negate your personal experience is bad. And really leaves no role for the negative. The straight stuff about big skulls attacking or doing this stuff won't prevent big spills from being anything, or DD from having like its sort of monopoly over debate. It doesn't really change anything. The TOC example, I'm also at the TOC and I want to win the round. The role of the judge should be to vote for the better debater, which we did above. The inclusion stuff, fairness outweighs. 1, it turns because it's structural. Fairness excludes body from the debate space, which internally turns our argument. 2nd, it's a meta constraint, which was done on the T framework shell. The 8.0 fairness makes more sense for at large, and fairness the framework doesn't abuse people. It's not a form of policing. Rather, it's just a form of saying that we should debate in some sort of way, which doesn't force you to do anything because there's an infinite number of things you can do under my interpretation. The B, it's like the political argument we're making about it forces far right people to just see it in if people just do not engage with the state, which is not worse. The 3 point, yes, the judge should do safety, but trivializing things like T framework as equivalent to actual forms of violence is a bad thing, and T framework is not violent. They have to win that it is. The D point, no, we never said that you have to do this. The method, it fails. They don't do anything from hypervisualization. It won't stop disclosure from being a norm, and you should vote negative on presumption because voting app does nothing.
Are you ready for cross?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's start on topicality.
Sure.
So you read 3 topical versions of the affirmative. Do any of them include a discussion of how we can subvert the debate space to make it more inclusive?
All of them can. It's like...
Okay, explain, because you're like, destroy the economy.
I can explain. So your thesis is that things like politics are bad. We are making an argument that the outside, or you are making an argument that the outside world is present in things like debate, we say that breaking down things like breaking down the state outside of debate through things like debate will show that you're against the norms that the state has put onto people, i.e., the anti-trans policies that you have articulated, which falls back and allows for discussions of trans violence.
So, like, the part 3 where I'm like, debate sucks, could that be in the 1AC?
Yeah.
How would that work then?
So you make arguments for why debate is. So this might be a weird word, but you make arguments for why debate is sort of a microcosm of the external world. You make reasons for why debate represents the state. You make reasons why debate is bad because it is anti-queer, and then you read reasons that subvert the state, destroy the state, which would then destroy the things that the state imposes or the norms that are imposed inside of it.
I don't want to destroy the state. That's not the argument.
Well, you've made arguments for why the current form that politics is functioning in is bad, which means that sort of a revolutionary system that breaks those down would solve a decent chunk of the app. Insofar as a TVA is just a counterpoint with efficiency framing, it should solve a decent amount of your offense.
The Archer evidence, where does it talk about debate?
It says advocates in law gain persuasive skills. I guess it conflates the idea of debate and law, but it's like debating between like people and.
If I can't access the debate space, how do I build advocacy skills?
So we think that T framework allows our structural fairness claim isolates that T framework allows as many people to engage as possible, and we think that well, I guess wait, can you repeat your question? I think I misunderstood it.
If I can't access the space, so like for example, there's a reason I'm reading this 1AC, and it's because normative conceptions of debate are not accessible to me. So if I can't access the debate space in the first place, how do I get skills?
So we think that engaging in topical forms of debate where there is equal things like limits will give you the skills of persuasion that allow you to break down those systems inside of debate, if that makes sense.
Okay, let's talk about case answers. You say, yeah, what was the stuff about disclosure and competition?
Competition is good. It is inevitable in debate. And things like people asking for disclosure are just inevitable. But the inevitability of it is good because.
Did I ever say competition bad?
Well, you've articulated reasons why things like disclosure are bad. I'm making the link that says that things like disclosure are key to things like competition and the competitive nature of debate.
I see.
Yeah.
Abstract I have 106 left. The order will be I suppose, grab a new sheet of paper. Then it will be the 1AC starting with extension and framing, and then it will be topicality and framework.
Is it a theory shell or like? Are you gonna
it's not really a theory shell, but you'll want a new sheet of paper.
Okay, cool. So
I suppose it's a theory shell.
Nuaw advantage / case framework.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm good.
Is okay, cool. Spreading is a uniquely bad practice. I will defend that as a necessarily bad practice in this round because I asked them not to do it before the round started, but I'll defend it as being a bad practice overall. There are 3 justifications for this. A is gender dysphoria. In order to pass this system to not experience gender-based violence inside of the debate space or outside of it, trans people are forced to modify their voices. This is virtually impossible at greater than 250 words per minute. Take it as performative offense that I'm forced to speak faster in this speech than I was during the 1AC because it's the only possible way that I can win the round because they dumped on me at 300 words per minute for 7 minutes. B is physical deformity. I have a chest dysphoria, which makes it really, really hard to breathe when I'm speaking anywhere faster than 200 words per minute, which means that their form of debate is not necessarily accessible. Holding to their performance, they performed a model debate that I cannot access, which proves that even if they win topicality, it doesn't matter because I can't engage in their form of debate anyway. See, even if I don't have to spread faster, it still leads to anxiety because of PTSD. I've experienced with yelling and spreading sounds literally the exact same, which means that it doesn't solve back. In addition, this is a reason to reject them and hold them to their model of debate. This has excluded me from the debate space and extend the accessibility and inclusion warrants that were in the text of the 1AC, why they should lose this round because I couldn't access it in the first place. In addition, it supercharges the violation because I told them not to do it in the first place. I can send you the timing of the doc. It definitely reaches the bright line of spreading. In addition, they're going to make this argument how there's no bright line of spreading. Just gut check it. They're talking way faster than I was in the 1AC and asking. Yeah, I did ask, but asking still doesn't solve because it forces the debaters to out the reasons why they need accommodations in the first place. But case. Extend the role of the ballot and role of the judge, which is to vote for the debater that constructs the best liberation strategy for oppressed bodies. There are a few justifications that weren't sufficiently answered. A, if I'm not included in this space, I can't reap the benefits the rules create. This is an independent justification for my accessibility and inclusion pre-constrained procedural fairness because we need to debate whether or not this space should exist or is accessible to people in the first place before we talk about the actual fucking rules of the place. B, if trans people keep fleeing the activity just like all other marginalized identities, then it's eventually going to have to be reformed, which means that we start weighing time frames. C, the judge has a jurisdictional claim as an educator to ensure safety and inclusion, not in this round, but in this space. This role of the ballot is preferable to theirs because it's less arbitrary. They say vote for the better debater, but they never tell you how you determine who the better debater is. That means that our role of the ballots are not mutually exclusive. You determine who the better debater is by who proposes the best liberation strategy for oppressed bodies on the line by line. They say they get 2 in our arguments. They don't get new 2 in our arguments. A, there's a time trade-off differential where they can say anything they want, and I can't cover it in the 3-minute 2AR if we're talking about procedural fairness. And B, structural fairness pre-constrains this argument. On the role of the ballot presumption, there's a presumption disadvantage. These generic arguments are always used against innovative 1ACs, which proves that they're defending the status quo and always psychologically biased towards defending the status quo, which means that they're taking advantage of tactically using this against people who are trying to innovate in the debate space and proves that they are the status quo. What's the disadvantage of voting for them? They group the 2 reasons. They dropped the reason why I do need the ballot because that's how we tactically subvert the debate space. I said the debate is bad, but then I asked for the ballot because I'm tactically using my debate skills to show how debate is really fucked up. But then I also want the ballot to subvert the debate and show explicit contradictions. Then they say I say the competition is a good thing. That takes out all of that offense, and I already answered the change outside of the round because ballots are a signal what is and is not welcome. On the politics disadvantage group, the last thing that's bad and violent, forcing trans people to testify is bad thing, and we're still tactically working outside of the debate. On topicality and framework, counter interpretation of if I'm transgender and just justified why debate has been violent to me, then I don't need to be topical. A, it forces people like me to play respectability politics when I can't access any of the space anyway. For example, I can't access the space anyway because I don't have resources like cutting cards because I'm from a small school, which means that it's not always accessible. And B, my model of debate leads to advocacy skills. For example, I've been active in Beyond Resolve and still is very specific to the area of the library. C, fairness, disclose yourselves back. And this is just literally, don't use this as an example. This is one time because it's a brand new one they see, but usually they'd be able to prep it. And this is violent in a different way because they're forcing me to engage in a topical version, forcing me to engage in the debate space instead of proposing a different alternative. And there's a status quo disadvantage. This topicality shell is forcing my 1AC out of the debate space, and I prove the debate is actively violent, which they concede that the TVA is not include the 1AC. And accessibility pre-constrains this. They still have prep out and engagement in a personal narrative. I would say that prep outs are actually bad because it forces people to live disingenuous discussions where you're like just trying to read as much shit as possible instead of like engaging with the personal narrative I read, which is probably bad.
You have 220?
Yeah. Starting now. So what is the bright line for spreading? You said 250 words per minute. Wait, one. Sorry, my mom came in. I'm just gonna restart my prep. Sorry about that. So yeah. How am I over that limit? I specifically made sure that I cut things from the doc, so I made sure I was under that limit, and I went super slow on the case page. So
it's not super slow, but okay, I'm sure you can debate about it. If you're just gonna make an argument, make it during speech time. If you have a question,
but I'm asking you like where the violation is. Like, where have you articulated that I was above 300 words or 250 words a minute?
I timed the doc. I cut out what you cut out.
Where? How much was the doc? Or what speed was I at?
It was. I can find it. It was above 250.
Okay.
Well, where is it? Do you want me to just time it again or what?
It's cool. Okay. So I guess it'll just be the 1AR off, or actually no, it'll just be framework quickly, T framework, or not quickly, T framework, the case, and then the 1AR off. Or actually, I'll just put the 1AR off at top. Never mind. So 1AR off, framework case. One meet. There's no screenshot of the violation. They don't get new 2-hour. They don't get new 2-hour violation. It's unpredictable, and it's a new argument in the 2 hours. You should hold the line. Nowhere they articulated where I was above 250 words per minute. My spreading is much faster than it's near 450. So I am genuinely trying to accommodate. If I went a little bit faster on accident, that is literally not my fault because, or I guess it's my fault. But the risk of the impact of the violation is super small because I'm not actively trying to do this thing. It was genuinely a mistake that I was not attempting to do. Second, you link as well. You could have made this arg slowly and then sat down after the 1 hour, but you decided to go faster and answer all of the arguments. That's a form of contradiction, which outweighs and turns all of your arguments under your roll the ballot because it's bad for trans liberation. It makes debaters ethically detached and makes them go to things like BLM rallies, but then say the N-word when they're with their white friends, which makes them terrible people and internally turns all of your arguments which are counter-interpretation. We can spread above 300 words per minute. One, it's not better for things like Clash. In talking about things like trans liberation, if we can talk about more things, we can engage in more trans scholarship, read more things like critiques of their theory, and make sure that their theory is as best as possible and determine the logistics of their theory, which is the Clash argument from Framework. Only doing that above 350, only doing that is viable over 250 words per minute. Otherwise, there's not enough information in the debate space, and it's modeled to super small debates where we don't learn as much as we possibly can. Learning about trans liberation is offense under their roll ballot and internal link turns all of their arguments. Second, the accessibility stuff will win arguments why fairness outweighs on the other page, but if they're winning, it will win impact turns on the case page for why it shouldn't matter. The line bar line. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do this, and I really apologize. I understand that it makes debate hard for you, but I'm sorry, and I didn't mean to do it. The sort of PTSD, the PTSD argument. You don't have to yell, and you can just talk a little bit. So you can just talk quieter, which solves back all of your arguments. I know a ton of people who spread with a whispering voice, which solves back and internally turns your argument. It doesn't supercharge the violation because even though you asked me to do it, I tried to accommodate. I can give you my spreading voice after the round, and see, and it's much faster than this. It means I'm definitely trying to accommodate for this argument independently. This argument is super like shifty and doesn't really have a right line because you don't know what constitutes spreading, and they went faster than I am going right now, and their other speech means it doesn't matter. Their last impact evidence, their last impact is that it just makes it virtually impossible because trans people have to change their voice, but this is empirically denied in this round because they are going faster than I did in the 1NC, which means that this argument is just false. The fact that they did it otherwise is responded to because they didn't have to respond to the 1NC. If this argument is true, they could have just read it, sat down, and read this slowly, which solves back all your arguments. Framework. Our interpretation is the one that the 1AC must have found a hypothetical implementation of the resolution in which states ban lethal autonomous weapons. 2 are going for 1 impact, fairness, competitive equity, no stable stasis going into debate, undermines and link turns any benefit that comes from the activity, no possibility for discussions or education in a world where we cannot test the core thesis claim of the affirmative. Fairness is an impact and outweighs everything. 1, fairness and impact and outweighs everything. 1, it's intrinsic. Debate is a game. Some level of equity is necessary to sustain its speech time, speech order, ballot, etc. Prove. B, conceded it's a side constraint. Otherwise, judges hack against you since you presume them to lose fairly. That internal link turns their trans liberation argument because it means that bad judges will just hack against trans people. Only a model debate where it's equal and nobody cheats will be better. 3, link turns the 1AC. Loss of fairness disincentivizes participation, which means our interp is a prerequisite their external offense. Additionally, any argument that contests the validity of fairness, internal link turns argument. 4th reason why fairness outweighs is dropped is because things like trans violence can't be solved in one debate round, but linearly you can end things like unfair practices inside a debate space, which outweighs their arguments. The ability to engage doesn't matter because 1, we're internal link turning it with our structural fairness claim. This is that we prevent bodies from being actually excluded from the debate space. And second is that you are able to engage in this debate round by reading things like counter-interpretations of framework, which means that you're able to engage in things like the debate space, but you're choosing not to. But you're choosing not to. Now the TVA solves a huge chunk of the affirmative. The affirmative is stasis around an idea that politics and stuff like that is bad. The TVA would destroy that political system, would allow trans people to rebuild it. Yes, you can talk about trans violence in the affirmative. Your narrative is not mutually exclusive with my model narrative is not mutually exclusive with my model debate. Here's the TVA. Read a dissad about the economy on the affirmative. Read the link that says that banning lethal autonomous weapons would destroy the entirety of the government, which means that it would collapse upon itself. That stops all the bad policies, all the trans bills that are coming into play, which stalls back for most of your offense and allows you to talk about things like trans violence and frame it through a lens of the economy collapsing is good because it destroys things that hold sort of anti-trans notions in place. View the counterplan as view the TVA as a counterplan, which solves a huge chunk of the affirmative with the net benefit of things like limits, which solves back for all of their arguments. Now the line by line, or now the counter-interpretation. 1, there's a dissent to their counter-interpretation. Makes there are people who will just start lying about being transgender because they don't have to solve their argument. Second, there's no problem. Second, we don't know who. It makes people lie, which is not. Or second, it makes people sort of determine. It makes other people have opinions on whether other people are transgender or not, which is a terrible model. Third, every sort of minority group will just say this argument. It doesn't solve any of our offense. Black people will say that they can do it, and then Indian people will say that they can do it. It doesn't solve anything because it's not specific to anything at large. 4, view this through a lens of definitions. There is no definition in the 1AR, so you don't know what their model of debate entails. Respectability politics. 1, you are a form of respectability politics as well. You try to make debate what you think debate should look like, which is a form of respectability politics. Second, we're not respectability politics. Drop that impact turns are inevitable because some form of exclusion is inevitable from anywhere, meaning we're not a form of policing or making debate respectable. Rather, we're saying it's best for things like trans people due to things like the TVA, and the reason why it internally
Towards your argument, you say that your model leads to activism. Our clash impact that will extend here leads to activism as well. Debating and having equal limits about things leads to things like clash. Our archer evidence, I say, is that people that are in the law field engage in good forms of clash and engage in skills that help them solve things like trans violence inside of the real, because they gain persuasion skills which interlink in their arguments. Your model debate prevents any activism because there's no way to engage with your model or determine whether it's true or not. You also don't get to weigh the case because we haven't been able to truth test the sort of verifiability of your arguments. Disclosure doesn't solve, because this was a new affirmative season, doesn't solve the sort of norming argument. Doesn't make sense. Yes, the TVA solves. I answered this argument above, but there was no warrant for why it doesn't solve. They say prep outs are bad. No, it's not a question of prep outs, just having the ability to engage in things in the first place. I was able to engage in your personal narrative, but not to an extent or degree that I would have. It was a topical affirmative because it's new and it's unpredictable for me. The advantage. I'm impact turning their model debate. This is offense under their role about. They force people to negate their idea of trans fluidity, which is most definitely a bad thing. And link towards the idea, it forces things like transphobes into debate space because it makes them sort of antagonists to these arguments. It makes LARPers who hate K-debate sort of get annoyed by these things. They'll be like, oh, I keep losing to things like these non-TFs, and they sort of develop a hate for those things. It forces you to negate people's identity, which is writ large bad under their offense. This outweighs the spreading shell because it's much more violent, because it's sort of in round debates that's currently happening, and what their model of debate and what their model forces them to do, what their method forces them to do. This is offense under their role of ballot. Even if we don't win it, the role of ballot to be to vote for the better debater. Fairness outweighs, which is what we did above, because inclusion is non-unique and there's no way to verify it. Yes, it's not mutually exclusive, but the only way to determine what the better debater is through only pure debate knowledge. Anything else is unpredictable and arbitrary.
106 starts. It starts with the 1AC.
You said the order was just the app?
The 1AC and then topicality and framework.
Okay, I'm good.
Okay. They lose the round when they don't do enough work on the role of the ballot and role of the judge, which is to vote for the debater that constructs the best liberation strategy for oppressed bodies. I did more work on the inclusion and accessibility warrants, which are prior questions to the evaluation of topicality. If I'm winning that I cannot access the space in the first place without the use of nobodiness, which is the organizational strategy of the 1AC that is going to change the debate space, it means it functions at a fundamentally higher layer of the debate. I'm saying that this is how we should debate overall, while they're saying that inside of the debate space, I have to debate the topic, which means that the nobodiness, if it's implemented as a political system in the debate space, would constrain how the discussion of the topic happens, which means it operates at a fundamentally higher layer of the flow. Even if you don't evaluate that, I'm still winning inclusion and accessibility, because if I can't access the debate space in the first place, then I can't reap the benefits that the rules create. They're missing this prerequisite. If the debate space is fucked and I can't even debate in the first place, it doesn't matter what the rule is. It literally doesn't matter what the rule is. And B, they also dropped the time frame analysis that whether they like it or not, so many people are fleeing the activity that it's eventually going to die and eventually going to have to be reformed. So we might as well do it now, which stops the violence on time frame. See, they also dropped the jurisdictional claim, which outweighs their norming statements that the judge's role in the round is an educator to ensure safety and inclusion, not just in this round, but in the entire space overall, which is what we're going to be doing on the cross-app work on their flow. But extend the Fisher 19 evidence, which is that nobodiness is a political strategy, which also implicitly answers the ballot claims. As in this round, I need that you need to use the ballot as an endorsement of my method or liberation strategy for oppressed bodies. If they get the ballot and still think that my method is a good thing, then it doesn't matter, because ballots are a thing of what is and is not welcome in activity. Fisher 19 illustrates that Nobodiness is tactically using the hypervisibility politics, which then beats back and subverts the state. So, for example, I say the debate space is fucked, but then I'm using my skills as a debater to ask for the debate to point out the problems with the debate community, which leads to reform overall. But their only extended impact is that it forces people to be like anti-trans. First, this is like a brand new extrapolation, and second, it's not unique. They literally dropped the part 3 about how debate is already uniquely anti-trans. You literally can't make it worse, and even if they did, it's probably worth it that there's a 1% risk of solvency, considering that they conceded in nobodiness evidence that it's a political strategy that can lead to safety, communities of care inside of the debate space, which reforms how policies are enacted. That's 100% conceded, linking back to my rule about if there's a 1% chance that their topicality shell is not true, they conceded my offense under the rule of the ballot. It's game over. Let's go there. Extend the interpretation that either transgender debaters don't have to defend the topic, or if I explain how the debate space is being uniquely violent for me, then I also don't have to defend it. We're going for the skills and advocacy movement. This type of debate forces debaters to specialize in their area of the library, even if it destroys fairness. It doesn't matter because those debaters that are using this type of debate, which is probably not going to be the vast majority of debaters, wouldn't be able to access the space in the first place. So it proves that only a small fraction of debaters are going to be doing this because it's not always competitively successful. It's the only way that we can access the space. In addition, extend inclusion and accessibility are prerequisites. The topical version of the affirmative literally doesn't solve. Here's the explanation. You have to, only offense that I'm getting is off of my defense, is off of nobodiness, which has nothing to do with the resolution. You're not voting for me because I defended the topic. You're voting for me because I have the better liberation strategy. And if you don't signal with that with the ballot, then it doesn't signal what's welcome in the debate space, so I don't get offense anyway, which solves back. But yeah, that's pretty good.
Good round.
Hey everyone. McMillan,
I'm here.
you there?
Yeah.
Cool. Good debate. I vote affirmative. I think I guess we have limited time, so we have 15 minutes before the next round starts. So I want to keep this kind of quick. Basically, yeah, I think this roll the ballot, roll the judge argument is kind of conceded starting in the AC. That it's a question of who endorses the best survival strategy. And I think that the neg hasn't really answered this argument very well, because while you're forwarding a lot of arguments that like, hey, fairness is key to competition and competitive equity, I don't think you address the argument at all that there is a prerequisite to fairness, which is fairness for whom, right? And so if you exclude them from the debate space, then who cares about what sort of fairness you're offering for people who are already in it? I think that the ballot in this case is an endorsement of that status quo debate is messed up and that we should provide for space spaces. I think that's a repudiation of misgendering that happens and this hyper visibility that happens in the debate space with disclosure, or now with like live streams or Discord, things like that. And that I do have a role as an educator to make sure that debate feels and is a safe space for all who choose to participate. I don't think the topical version of the F or the 3 that you offer in the NC solve any of this, quite frankly. I think they're very contrived. I mean, your argument boils down to like, hey, your topical version of a non-transphobic app is to read DDEV basically, and to say that eventually leads to some extra topical advantage about trans awareness. And I think it's also performatively a little bit messed up, especially as it comes to this spreading question. Now, I get that there's no bright line here, but I think I think it just, there are some questions of performance in the NC that like need to be addressed. And I'm fine to have that conversation elsewhere and how you set up a bright line for that, but that doesn't factor too much into my decision, but it is like, it's a little odd, I think, in this round. I think there's some discussion about why the affirmatives roll the ballot or method could lead to anti-trans sentiment in debate, or maybe why it excludes trans folks who might just want to read a topical app and read like your traditional hedge good type arguments. But I think that's ultimately new in the 2NR, and I don't have a reason why that should be justified. So yeah, I think that's kind of the summation of the decision. Any questions?
No, that's fine. Good debate. Thank you.
I don't think I have any questions. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Good luck.